So last class, we got into the topic of ways to deconstruct and break down a conflict. One of the big points of discussion we got at was the different ways that we understand a conflict that happened and the different resources that we have to manage that conflict, right? So some of those include resources available to us. So Linda got into a car accident with another vehicle. She explained what happened to a police officer. This situation, her explaining an accounting event counts as how many folks put A, self-report, tangible evidence, witness testimony, or contextual testimony. Yes, so this is an easier one. The answer here is a self-report, right? So self-report is something that we'll use a lot, especially in the context of a conflict, to describe what happened. You get into a car accident, maybe it's icy and kind of treacherous on the road, and you T-bone another car. Your self-report is describing what happened and making sense of that conflict to a police officer, right? So self-reports are ways that we can share information. Self-reports are, of course, impacted by issues. They're not perfect. So things like our perception skills, so how we receive and put together the information that we have, plays a really big role. So if you're driving and you hit another car, maybe you're on your phone, you're not following super closely, maybe it's pretty blizzardy out and you're not able to get a sense of what's going on. You have a limited perception and ability to make sense of events. You also might have challenges in memory. It's a really kind of sudden moment and you might not fully remember what happened. That's going to affect your account too. And your ability to encode and make sense of messages could impact things as well. It was a four-way street. It wasn't clear who was going to go first at a stoplight, and so on. So that could affect your ability to make sense of that. That's different from these other methods, right? Because tangible evidence are basically physical documents that confirm what happened. So if you and partner are arguing over bills, the physical bill, the tangible evidence. Witness testimony is a third party or additional resource that's making sense of that conflict and sees it from the outside. And then contextual is not one of the main forms. So whenever you go to something like a practice question or a question on the midterm, process of elimination, this one's probably not the right answer. You can cut that out and work from there. So last class, we went over the study circle assignment. Again, I assigned your study circles. So those are on Canvas through an announcement. Again, let me know as soon as possible if you have a conflict and can't make the date of your study circle. The study circle is in class, right? You don't have to do anything to present outside of class. The study circle is going to involve you being assigned a topic. We're going to do more brainstorming on that on Friday, but the topic is not one where you have to write a research paper or anything like that. It's instead using our skills in conflict management to engage respectfully on that topic. Afterwards, you'll submit your reflection of your study circle along with some responses to peers, other study circles in the class, and then those three parts, your physical participation, your reflection, and your response to two other study circles will make your overall grade on this. Again, the rubric is available on Canvas along with a description of each of those parts. If you've got any questions or want to send me a draft in advance of something like your reflection, once you do the study circle, just let me know. So we also talked about deconstructing conflict and some examples there. And one thing that I had you all start on Monday's class were just taking a look at the three different styles of deconstructing conflict and starting to map those out. So we will take some time to have each group from last class share the style of conflict deconstruction that they focused on. I'll give you a little bit more time to acclimate and review some of the things that you talked about there last class, and maybe add anything else that you want to. And then we'll apply conflict deconstruction to a case study and ask each group to use that style of conflict deconstruction. So remember that the three groups that we had, so we had the change-oriented conflict analysis, that has Abby, Casey, Jonah, Rena, Stormy, and Gracie. It's the group over here. We had a Hopper-Wilmot conflict assessment guide, which is Calvin, Oliver, Dawn, Logan, Tuff, Sarah, and Ellie. The middle group, or is it middle group? Yeah. And then change-oriented on this side with Abby, Casey, Jonah, Rena, or no, sorry. Then there's the where model with Jamie, Angela, Shane, Joe, Ryan, and Brooke. So I'm going to hand these back, give you a little bit of time to review, see if there's anything you want to add in answer to these questions. Then I'll ask each group to share, and we'll kind of continue on from this point. So, back to this group over here. Again, take some time to maybe review, talk about, see if there's anything you want to add to these questions. And then in a few minutes, I'll ask each of these groups to share. Oh.
Yeah.
any groups who'd like some more time on this? All right, so why don't we go ahead and have each of these groups talk together on these questions. Again, what are the major parts or steps in this model? What does this model focus on within conflict? And then lastly, in what situations will this model be the most useful? So let's start with where's conflict map?
Okay, so for what are the major steps of the parts of the model? Did you just want us to go through the questions?
Yeah, share what your group kind of discussed and put together on this.
So on number 1, we had major steps to the WHERE model are conflict history, describing major history of events, development of conflict, use of mapping data, and a third party. This model focuses on third parties, but also this party on its own. It focuses on clarification. And then for the third one, this map model will be most helpful in situations where the whole picture or perspective is needed. It helps you access like all the parts of the conflict, and it focuses on having
Yeah. So thanks for talking over this model, right? So where's conflict map is one of the 3 approaches to mapping out a conflict. And as you say, right, it's really focused on history and understanding the context of a conflict. So for instance, if we were to do a kind of survey of World War II, right, we would look at some of the major elements of that conflict, including the different countries, their interests, their goals, and so on. So I really like the way your group brought up that it's creating the whole picture and trying to understand the different parties and their different interests. So it's a great way to understand a larger scale conflict and a lot of different groups that have different interests and challenges that they're trying to navigate. So if you're working, for example, for a company or a group, and that group has a larger scale conflict or lack of good communication among its members, where's conflict map could be a really good approach to use to make sense of this larger web of information. Let's talk second about the Hawker-Wilmot conflict assessment graph.
So the steps we came up with are nature, organization, and style of conflict, interests and goals, power, conflict and emotions, and then analyzing interactions, overall patterns, negotiation, and then forgiveness of reconciliation. So kind of like the focus of this is kind of like a court style hearings where you hear like all sides of the opinion. It's extensive with like interviews and questions. It's a bit more relaxed. And it's like a thorough process that can potentially be extensive of all sides. And it's mostly fun like court cases where it's like extended out so you get like the interrogations and witnesses, and also in a family disagreement where you hear all sides of the story from a perspective.
Yeah. So I really like the way your group brought up the idea that this model is used in dealing with something like a court case, a family disagreement, or something like that, right? Something where it does need to be slower and really take into account the different perspectives of different sides, right? One big element that's distinct about this form is that it's focused on things like forgiveness and reconciliation. So compared to something like Where's Conflict Map, Hawker-Wilmot is a lot more concerned with the feelings and emotions and ideas that are guiding the sources of the conflict, right? So maybe you have 2 parents who are disputing who should get custody of a child and both have really strong feelings about the child and about the relationship. And understanding and unpacking those emotions is a really important part to understand what's at play with the conflict, right? Again, whereas with Where's Conflict Map, there's much more of a focus on understanding the different parties and their interests. So again, a focus on feeling, on forgiveness, on reconciliation, on resolving the conflict once these emotions and feelings and challenges are dealt with makes this one a little bit unique. And lastly, change-oriented conflict analysis.
So the steps we have for change-oriented is the 1, story, 2, information sources, 3, the context of the conflict, 4, the primary parties involved, 5, the issues, 6, demands and interests, social reality, affected parties, power, resources, and options for settlement. So we all decided that this kind of focuses on managing conflict so that everybody gets something from the conflict. And like an example of this would be if you like an internal relationship and you live with someone or if you share something, it's almost like a compromise so everybody gets a little part of the thing.
Yeah. So I think this is a good example. I like the idea that everybody gets a bit of what they want, right? So this could be seen as a style focused on compromise. Again, one of the conflict management styles where everybody gets a little. Could also, at its best, be something like collaboration, where everybody wins and gets something to gain. Again, think back to that orange example. One person wants the peel, one person wants like the flesh of the orange, and together they're both able to get what they want by communicating with each other. So that's kind of at play with conflict analysis. Again, understanding the idea of social reality is a really important element of this one too. So the change-oriented conflict analysis approach is concerned with social reality, or how individuals in a conflict perceive the conflict and the ability to resolve the conflict, right? So for instance, if you're in front of a larger company or group and you're trying to talk about the workplace culture and environment, you might think things are never going to change. This environment's going to stay the same. And so that perception and that social reality is going to impact how you participate or engage or try to solve the conflict, right? When we have situations where conflict breaks down or doesn't go well, oftentimes it's based on social reality. It's based on people feeling like dealing with the conflict is not going to get people anywhere, right? It's why couples who have like significant political disagreements might feel frustrated with dealing with those in conflict. To them, their social reality is, we're not going to change each other's opinions, we're not going to resolve anything, we're just going to hurt each other's feelings. So the conflict analysis approach is very much concerned with understanding why people feel the way they do about conflict and about the issue being discussed. Not just the emotions, but also the way they perceive conflict as being able to be resolved through communication. So all of these models are helpful and useful for different reasons. Again, they're ways for us to make sense of and break down a conflict into its different parts. And I appreciate each group taking the time to share and understand the one that they're assigned. You might expect a question on the midterm that asks you to compare and contrast the 3 different styles of deconstructing conflict, or one that gives you a scenario and asks you to explain how you would deconstruct that conflict. So it's good to know and be able to compare some of these groups. Now that you've taken the time to go over these models, what I want you to do in just a minute is return back to these groups, and you'll focus on a case study or application of this conflict. And we're going to do the same case study together. That way you can see each of these styles of deconstructing conflict being used differently. So the case study that I wanted to use for this class is the Dakota Access Pipeline. So you might be familiar with this topic, right? It's been in the news for several years now. And I don't share this topic because I want to share any particular side or point of view, right? As I mentioned in this class, I want to help you to develop the skills to make independent judgments and decisions. But instead, I think this is a good case study because it's a contemporary topic, right? It has a lot of competing sides and perspectives, and a lot of disagreement. You might be familiar that the kind of pipeline runs through sections of the United States, but one of the major areas of dispute is in its intersection with an indigenous reservation, right? So the conflict in many ways has been centered around the creation of this pipeline and the way that it interacts with things like indigenous sovereignty. So what I would like you to do in your groups, right, is while you might have a little bit of a sense of this topic, or maybe this topic is entirely new to you, I'd like your group members to take some time and look more into this topic. So Dakota Access Pipeline. Who are the parties or groups that are in dispute with one another, right? What is this conflict about? What's at the core of it? And then once your group feels pretty good about that, what I'd like you to do on one sheet of paper per group, and you can pull out a new sheet for this for each group, is to map out, using the style conflict in your group, the different steps. So in other words, steps 1 through 10 of the conflict guide that you all worked on over here, using where or using Harper-Wilmot, right? Map out this conflict of the Dakota Access Pipeline and show us how the steps that you talked about earlier can be used to explain and make sense of this conflict here. And then I'll again ask each group to share what you've come up with in terms of mapping out and making sense of this conflict. So I know this is a bigger ask and it's going to take a bit more time to do. So I'll give you a good amount of time to work on this, a good 15 to 20 minutes to work on this and map out this conflict. And then I'll have each group share the things that stood out to you. Dakota Access Pipeline. Yeah.